Welcome to Immigration Briefing. The content of the briefing includes books, Nascent Tiger Vietnam constrained by politics. U.S. starts deportation flights to Venezuela, aiming to curb migration. Terrorist who gunned down football fans in Brussels came to Europe illegally by boat. Visa chairman and former CEO Al Kelly to step down from board. If you thought the voice was bad, just wait until the next election. Books, Nascent Tiger Vietnam constrained by politics. Nikkei Asia. The book Vietnam, Asia's Rising Star by Brooke Taylor and Sam Korsmo argues that Vietnam has fully embraced free trade and globalization and is on its way to becoming a tiger economy. The authors claim that Vietnam's high rate of economic growth over the past 20 years, which has lifted millions out of poverty, justifies the tiger economy label. They downplay concerns about human rights and authoritarianism, suggesting that progress in Vietnam has shown these to be irrelevant. However, the article argues that Vietnam's economic progress does not automatically make it a globalization warrior. The country still faces bureaucratic obstacles and import and export controls, making it difficult for businesses to operate. The article also notes that Vietnam's growth model is already under pressure, with rising inequality and economic slowdowns. Academic evidence suggests that democracies tend to achieve higher GDP per capita than non-democracies. Additionally, the article highlights issues such as limited internet freedom, restrictions on financial flows, and restrictions on foreign participation in certain industries. While Vietnam has made economic progress, there are still significant challenges and limitations that need to be addressed for it to become a true tiger economy. U.S. starts deportation flights to Venezuela, aiming to curb migration. Washington Post. U.S. immigration authorities have returned 130 migrants to Venezuela on deportation flights. The move marks a crucial step for the Biden administration to reduce the record numbers of illegal crossings at the U.S. southern border. The deportations follow an agreement by the Venezuelan government to hold competitive elections next year, which paves the way for the Biden administration to ease U.S. economic sanctions. Terrorist who gunned down football fans in Brussels came to Europe illegally by boat. Telegraph. Abdulsalam Lassoud, the Tunisian terrorist who killed 2 Swedish football fans in Brussels, entered Europe illegally after arriving in Italy by boat. He had first reached the EU over a decade ago, moving around the bloc before settling illegally in Brussels. The failure of authorities to apprehend and expel him in the years before the attack has sparked a political debate in Belgium and the EU about the failure to repatriate migrants whose asylum applications are rejected. Lassoud claimed responsibility for the attack and identified himself as a member of ISIS in a video. Visa chairman and former CEO Al Kelly to step down from board. Bloomberg. Visa Incorporated has announced that Chairman Al Kelly will be leaving the board in January. Kelly, who served as the company's CEO before becoming chairman in 2019, will remain a senior advisor until mid-February before retiring from the company. Visa plans to name its lead independent director, John Lundgren, as its new chair, pending his re-election at the annual shareholders meeting in January. Kelly expressed his confidence in the company's future leadership, stating that he leaves Visa in excellent hands. If you thought the voice was bad, just wait until the next election. The Sydney Morning Herald. The Coalition, the Australian political alliance led by Prime Minister Scott Morrison, is expected to use similar tactics to those used in the campaign against The Voice, a proposal to give Indigenous Australians a greater say in government decisions, to attack opposition leader Anthony Albanese in the next federal election. The Coalition's campaign group, Advance Australia, executed a brutal campaign against The Voice, spreading lies and racist themes. The coalition is expected to use immigration as a key issue in the next election, exploiting grievances and prejudices against migrants. Albanese's party, Labour, must counter the coalition's tactics or face defeat. Labour leaders have been aware since 2022 that their stronghold is at risk and have been warned not to be complacent. Immigration is seen as the most ripe issue for exploitation, as it can feed into any grievance or prejudice. Labour MP Claire O'Neill has been working to undermine the standing of Home Affairs Minister Peter Dutton on border security and immigration, accusing him of incompetence. Journalists and media outlets, including the ABC, must review their coverage to ensure balance and avoid the spread of lies and distortion, according to columnist Nikki Sava. Analysis: Republican 2024 hopefuls use Israeli-Palestinian conflict to push hard line on immigration. Reuters. Republican presidential candidates are using the Israeli-Palestinian conflict to advocate for stronger border security between the U.S. and Mexico. The move comes as Republican voters are increasingly concerned about immigration and less interested in foreign policy than in previous elections. While Republicans have traditionally portrayed themselves as staunch defenders of Israel, using the conflict to frame the issue in domestic terms is a novel campaign tactic. Although there is no evidence to suggest that militants supporting attacks on Israel are entering the U.S. illegally, some Republican candidates have made that claim. New migrants to be moved on to Bibi Stockholm after Legionella scare. The Independent. The Home Office is returning asylum seekers to the Bibi Stockholm barge after tests revealed that the water supply was no longer contaminated with the bacteria that causes Legionnaire's disease. The migrants were moved off the barge in August after the discovery was made. Campaign groups are continuing to protest the use of the barge, with one being quoted as saying the barge was a terrifying residence that was 50 years old, rotten, and unfit for use. Shares in Visa, MasterCard slide on expected Federal Reserve fee cap proposal. Reuters. Shares in Visa and MasterCard have fallen by around 1% following the news that the U.S. Federal Reserve is expected to propose lowering the fees banks can charge retailers for processing debit card transactions. The cap on debit interchange fees has long been a contentious issue between credit card providers and banks, and retailers, who claim the fees are too high and damage consumers. Any changes proposed by the Fed will likely spark a fierce lobbying battle between the different industries. U.S. fintech Plaid hires first chief financial officer on road to potential IPO. Financial Times. U.S. fintech startup Plaid has appointed Eric Hart, former chief financial officer of Expedia, as its first CFO as it prepares for a potential initial public offering, IPO. Plaid enables customers to connect their bank accounts to outside applications, such as money transfer apps or online lenders, and share the required data. The company's business has thrived during the pandemic as customers increasingly use digital banking services. Plaid last raised money privately in 2021 at a valuation of over $13 billion. The company's IPO plans follow a failed $5.3 billion merger with Visa in 2021. Deadly perils in Mexico for migrants escaping climate catastrophe. The Guardian. Climate breakdown, environmental degradation, and disasters due to natural hazards are profoundly reshaping contemporary migration patterns worldwide, according to the UN Network on Migration. In 2022, a record 32.6 million people were newly displaced by disasters such as floods, drought, and earthquakes. Slow-onset climate impacts such as coastal erosion, sea level rise, ocean acidification, glacier melting, desertification, and ecosystem loss also factor in migration decisions but are much harder to quantify. Central America, a thin strip of land sandwiched between the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans, is particularly vulnerable to climate change, and Honduras is one of the region's poorest and most insecure countries. In 1998, Hurricane Mitch wrecked large swaths of Central America, leaving at least 8,000 people dead and another million homeless and landless in Honduras alone. As a result, the U.S. granted temporary protected status, TPS, to eligible undocumented Hondurans already in the country, giving them permission to work and protection from deportation, but no pathway for permanent residence. Almost 57,000 Hondurans still have Mitch-related TPS, but the special status has never been designated for other environmental or climate disasters, not even Hurricanes Eta and Iota, which struck less than 2 weeks apart in late 2020, and displaced almost 1 million people in Honduras. Then, like now, the only option for climate migrants hoping to seek refuge in the U.S. is to risk crossing the border. Climate migration is leaving Honduras without its population, said Ian Fry, the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in the context of climate change after a fact-finding mission to Honduras in September. We must ensure that people displaced across international borders due to climate change have the same rights as refugees. Climate shocks often expose, and are exacerbated by, weak governance, unchecked extractivism and corruption, all of which worsened in Honduras after a 2009 coup. For the people of Honduras, the decision to migrate comes down to a combination of social, political, security, economic, environmental, and demographic drivers. Sometimes, leaving feels like the only option. Early this year, the family decided Ramirez would go first, followed by his father. At home, the women would keep the family afloat with the front yard eatery they had opened after the sea first damaged the nursery. A local coyote offered to smuggle Ramirez across the border for $12,000, to be paid in installments upon arrival. He left, with 12 others, on February 14, Valentine's Day. The overland route through Mexico is one of the world's most perilous migration corridors, where corrupt officials work in cahoots with criminal gangs. It was nonetheless relatively straightforward for Ramirez, who traveled by car through Guatemala and Belize to Cancun, and then flew to Ciudad Juarez, but only after his aunt in Houston wired $1,100 for the flight, an extra expense the family had not expected. At the border, the group was locked in a safe house until their relatives could come up with an additional $3,000. The final bill was $18,000, a huge amount for the family, but it was too late to turn back. The detention center in Ciudad Juarez was already pretty full when Ramirez arrived, but people kept coming. It was late afternoon on Monday, March 27, when 24 or so handcuffed Venezuelans, who had been violently detained in a raid by local police and immigration officials, were brought in. Tensions had been running high in the city as thousands of people trying to reach the U.S. were stuck at the border due to COVID-era bans and new asylum policies. They were upset. It was hot, overcrowded, and there was not enough food or water. The guards released some migrants, but only, it has been alleged, those who could pay a fee. Ramirez does not recall, or is not able to put into words, the events leading up to the fire, but Kevin Cardona, a 25-year-old survivor from Guatemala also receiving medical care in Mexico, told The Guardian some Venezuelans were involved in an angry exchange with the guards, and threatened to start a fire. Others placed mattresses against the walls. It's unclear who started the fire, but the flames spread fast and the guards did not intervene. One guard said good luck before walking away, leaving 67 men trapped in the flames, according to a report by the National Human Rights Commission, CNDH. We tried to fill a bucket in the bathroom, but there was only a trickle of water. We were all shouting, "Let us out, unlock the door," said Cardona, who recalls raising his arms to protect his face before passing out. He regained consciousness in hospital 25 days later with third-degree burns on his face, torso and arms. The surgeons were unable to save his right hand or ear. 15 women who were detained separately were let out and survived. This was not the first time migrants had lit a fire to protest against poor conditions and abuse at detention centers, which have multiplied amid growing pressure and resources from the U.S. for Mexico to detain and deport more migrants. Civil society groups have documented and filed complaints to the CNDH for more than 20 years, which has issued more than 60 recommendations related to poor conditions, lack of due process, torture and deaths in the migrant detention centers. No one listened, nothing changed, no one cared. I feel so guilty. What more could we have done because this fire, these deaths, were both preventable and predictable, said Kuhner, of Imumi, the support group. Since the Ciudad Juarez fire, 33 small detention centers in Mexico have been closed. 17 larger ones remain open, but detainee numbers are way down, in large part due to a Supreme Court ruling in March limiting administrative detentions to 36 hours. A Senate investigation in Mexico is underway, and several people are facing criminal charges, including the director of the INM, who has denied any wrongdoing and continues in post. One lawmaker has called the fire a state crime. In the U.S., nothing changed. We're going to keep getting more of these sort of deadly incidents, because more people are migrating who are being channeled into the hands of smugglers or more dangerous routes, and we're diverting people into the hands of security agencies who are either trained for something close to combat, or they're corrupt, or both, said Isaacson of Walla. We the U.S. still believe that making the experience miserable is a way to deter migrants. Honduras contributes less than 0.05% to global greenhouse gases, but, as the oceans and atmosphere get hotter, sea level rise, superstorms, inland flooding and drought are expected to worsen across the region. The number of climate refugees trying to make it to the U.S. will almost certainly increase over coming months as the first climate-heating El Niño event since 2016 is expected to fuel more extreme weather that threatens lives and livelihoods. In Cedeno, Garcia's house is perilously close to the ocean and the flooded shrimp nursery. She feels guilty for leaving Ramirez but also relieved to be home with their daughter. The fire changed our lives forever, it's honestly a nightmare, he's not the same man. I have to find work and raise our daughter, but the sea is eating the land so fast, it won't be long before it takes our house. One day, Cedeno will be gone. That's all for today's news. Let's recap what we've learned. Vietnam's economic progress has been impressive, but it still faces challenges like bureaucratic obstacles and import-export controls. The country has potential, but there are limitations that need to be addressed for it to become a true tiger economy. The U.S. has started deportation flights to Venezuela, aiming to curb migration at the southern border. This follows an agreement by the Venezuelan government to hold competitive elections next year, which could lead to eased economic sanctions. A Tunisian terrorist who killed 2 Swedish football fans in Brussels entered Europe illegally by boat. This incident has sparked a debate about the failure to repatriate migrants whose asylum applications are rejected. Visa chairman Al Kelly will be stepping down from the board in January. Visa plans to name John Lundgren as its new chair. Kelly expressed confidence in the company's future leadership. The Australian coalition is expected to use similar tactics used against the Voice proposal in the next federal election. Immigration is seen as a ripe issue for exploitation, and Labor must counter the coalition's tactics to avoid defeat. Republican presidential candidates are using the Israeli-Palestinian conflict to push for stronger border security between the U.S. and Mexico. This tactic is new and reflects Republican voters' concerns about immigration. Asylum seekers are being returned to the Bibi Stockholm barge after tests revealed that the water supply is no longer contaminated. Campaign groups continue to protest the use of the barge. Shares in Visa and MasterCard have fallen following the news that the U.S. Federal Reserve is expected to propose lowering fees banks can charge retailers for processing debit card transactions. This could spark a lobbying battle between different industries. U.S. fintech startup Plaid has hired its first chief financial officer as it prepares for a potential IPO. Plaid enables customers to connect their bank accounts to outside applications and has thrived during the pandemic. Climate breakdown and natural disasters are reshaping migration patterns worldwide. Central America, particularly Honduras, is vulnerable to climate change, and the decision to migrate often feels like the only option for many people. So, what do you think? Are you surprised by these developments? Do you have any thoughts or questions? I'd love to hear your ideas and opinions. Let's continue the discussion. Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6Do Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6Do team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6Do Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6Do Brief via email.